Iran is stunned by the latest development in the Houthi saga. After more than a month of the US acting alone in its constant aerial bombardments of the militant group, it finally has an ally. The UK has joined the fight against the Houthis, taking to the skies in coordination with the United States. This is terrible news for the Houthis. They were already overmatched by the US, bringing the full force of at least one of its aircraft carriers to the Red Sea. With the UK joining the attack, this could mark the end of the group's influence in Yemen once and for all. On April 30, the New York Times was among the first to report on the joint US and UK operation against the Houthis. It pointed out that the strike represented the first time the two had worked together since President Donald Trump took office in January. Plus, it offered some vague details about the strike. According to the British Ministry of Defence, or MOD, the UK took part in the attacks to degrade Houthi capabilities and prevent further attacks against UK and international shipping. So, what's known so far? The US has yet to provide any comment on the British involvement, which isn't surprising. Outside of confirming and occasionally lauding its daily strikes against the Houthis, the US has typically provided few details about what it's actually targeting. Not commenting on British involvement fits with this modus operandi, suggesting that the US wants to keep its operations in Yemen as quiet as possible. The MOD is a little more talkative. It published a statement in the wake of the strikes, noting that working alongside the US was in line with a long-standing policy the UK has held since the Houthis began attacking commercial shipping vessels in the Red Sea. That statement appears to be referring to previous joint strikes conducted under former President Joe Biden's tenure, which will be covered later in the video. The MOD says that it acted on a careful intelligence analysis that identified a cluster of Houthi-operated buildings that the group was using to manufacture drones. Those buildings were about 15 miles south of the Yemeni capital of Sanaa. The UK deployed Eurofighter Typhoon jets, supported by Voyager tankers, to strike the buildings using ultra-precise Paveway IV guided bombs. According to the MOD, the strike was conducted after dark to minimize the possibility of civilian casualties, with a choice of precise weapons having the same purpose. The Guardian provided a handful of extra details in its report on the attack. It pointed out that the strike was the first military action approved by the UK's Labour government since it won the country's general election in the summer of 2024. The outlet also provided some quotes from the UK's Defence Secretary, John Healey, that offered some context for why the country is getting involved in the American strikes. Healey said that the UK's attack was taken in response to a persistent threat from the Houthis to freedom of navigation, while pointing out that the militant group's Red Sea attacks have led to a sharp decline in commercial shipping through the waterway. A 55% drop in shipping through the Red Sea has already cost billions, fueling regional instability and risking economic security for families in the UK. Healey commented on social media shortly after the joint strike took place. That's a diplomatic way of the UK saying it's had enough of the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. Now it's ready to put an end to them. That leads to a couple of questions. What does the UK bring to the table in the campaign against the Houthis? And what does this renewed UK involvement mean, both for the Houthis and the UK itself? There are already a couple of answers to the first question. The UK brought both Typhoon fighter jets and extremely powerful Paveway IV guided bombs to the battle against the Houthis. Don't sleep on the Typhoon, a twin-engine multi-role combat aircraft. The jet is the result of a combined effort by BAE Systems, EADS and Alenia Aeronautica to deliver a fighter jet that combines the best design philosophies in Europe. That combination of minds led to the creation of a jet that exhibits superior acceleration and is capable of near-instant turns when it's in the skies. Those features come from the jet's intelligent foreplane and delta low-drag configuration that, when combined with the Typhoon's high thrust-to-weight ratio, makes the jet one of the most maneuverable in the world. According to Army Recognition, these design choices also result in the Typhoon being around 30% lighter and up to 20% smaller than its predecessors, ideal for complex aerial operations. And that smaller size doesn't make the Typhoon a weak fighter jet either. It's powered by a pair of Eurojet EJ200 engines that allow it to reach a maximum speed of 1,550 miles per hour, a little over 2 times the speed of sound. It can maintain those types of speeds over distances up to 1,800 miles meaning the Typhoon is a great choice for operations that require flying over Yemen and back to base without the need for aerial refueling. Of course, the UK's use of aerial tankers in this recent strike against the Houthis still showcases that Typhoon can be refueled in the skies. That's even more worrying for the Houthis. It means the UK can extend its jets' already impressive flight range to conduct repeated attacks in a single operation. The Eurofighter also packs a terrific punch. Beyond the Paveway IV guided bombs, which will be covered shortly, the UK has the option of loading its Typhoons up with a variety of weapons. These start with a Mauser BK 27mm revolver gun system, which is built into every Typhoon and is capable of rattling off up to 1,700 rounds per minute. That's ideal for shredding through the drones and missiles the Houthis are using to attack commercial ships in the Red Sea. Beyond that powerful gun system, Typhoons can be loaded with a range of missiles to make it a multi-role fighter. These include up to 6 AMRAAM or BVRAAM missiles, the latter of which can be fired from beyond visual range that the jet's pilot can use to take out aerial threats. With this loadout, the Typhoon can also carry a pair of shorter range ASRAAM missiles loaded to its outer pylons in case it needs to get up close and personal. If the jet needs to hit targets on the ground, it can be loaded with the previously mentioned Paveway guided bombs, along with cruise missiles and anti-radar missiles. The latter are impressive. They're capable of bypassing the radars used by anti-air defenses, limiting an enemy's option when it comes to shooting them out of the skies. The Typhoon is even equipped to deal with maritime threats, such as the small vessels the Houthis occasionally use to attack commercial ships. The jet's maritime configuration typically sees 6 anti-ship missiles added to a loadout that includes 4 AMRAAMs and 2 ASRAAMs. Finally, the jet is also capable of providing close air support to troops on the ground, with that configuration being similar to the maritime loadout, only with the anti-ship missiles replaced by up to 18 Brimstone anti-armor missiles. So, the Typhoon hits hard, but it's also packed with several accessories that help to make it an effective aerial platform. These include its multi-function information and distribution system, or MIDS. With MIDS, the Typhoon gets a communication system that allows all elements of an associated command and control system to share and distribute data as required. In practice, this means a Typhoon pilot can listen to and view all relevant data about friendly and enemy fighters over an enormous distance. For allies, MIDS allow a Typhoon to coordinate attacks over massive ranges and come to another fighter's aid if it's in trouble. Enemies have to deal with a jet that often knows about the presence of the aerial threats it unleashes long before those threats reach their targets. Add the Typhoon's electro-optic targeting system into the mix, and you get an even more terrifying aerial platform. The jet is packed with sensors that allow it to detect, recognize, and identify aerial targets. Plus, it has onboard laser tracking that supports target designation both for its pilot and any other jets flying alongside the Typhoon. The jet also has an autopilot feature that allows for the flying of optimal attack profiles and 5 display surfaces that provide its pilots with full visibility in any conditions. It all adds up to a jet that the Houthis rightfully fear. And talking about fear leads to the weapon that the UK unleashed on the Houthis on April 29, the Paveway IV. Entering service in 2008 after being in development since the early 2000s, the Paveway IV is a guided bomb jointly developed by the UK and US defense manufacturer Raytheon. That alone makes it the perfect choice for a joint US and UK operation against the Houthis. It's used by both the UK's Royal Air Force and Saudi Arabia's military because it hits hard and almost always strikes its target. As its name implies, the Paveway IV is an upgraded version of previous Paveway bombs, with its design building on what was originally developed for the Paveway II. It's also based on Mk-82 500-pound bombs, though the Paveway IV modifies those bombs for improved penetration. The weapon features a guidance set that combines inertial navigation with semi-active laser homing to reach its target. Both can be supported by GPS, though that isn't a requirement. Laser homing typically activates in the bomb's terminal phase, allowing for mid-air course correction if the weapon has veered off target. Measuring around 10 feet, the Paveway IV is a small target, which makes it difficult for anti-air defenses to shoot out of the skies. Difficult doesn't mean impossible, but for the Houthis, who have limited aerial defenses to begin with, the Paveway IV is practically unstoppable. The bomb is capable of travelling around 18.6 miles, though the exact range depends on several factors, including its launch angle and flight path, and it's capable of travelling at subsonic speeds. Upon striking its target, the Paveway IV unleashes around 500 pounds of explosive fury that's capable of decimating buildings, just as it did on April 29. So there's a conclusive answer to what the UK brings to the table to support the US aerial campaign against the Houthis. In the Typhoon, the UK offers a multi-role fighter that stacks up to almost anything the US has, along with impressive firepower. That leads to the second question from earlier. What does the arrival of the UK in Yemen mean for the Houthis and for the UK itself? First, it's worth pointing out that the UK, working alongside the US in Yemen, isn't unprecedented. Earlier, we mentioned that the two worked together in 2024 under former President Biden's orders. Between January 11 and May 30, 2024, the two countries combined to conduct 5 joint naval and airstrikes against the Houthis in what the UK called a direct response to the militant group's attacks on shipping. However, those 5 strikes seem to be the limit of the UK's involvement. By the summer of 2024, the US was hitting the Houthis alone, with the last of its airstrikes under Biden taking place in January 2025. Why did the strike stop in that month? In January, Israel and Hamas announced a temporary truce to allow for the transfer of hostages between the two warring groups. That truce put a stop to the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. The militant group said that it was only launching strikes against commercial shipping to show support for Hamas in Gaza. An end to the fighting with Israel meant an end to those attacks, bringing the initial wave of US strikes in Yemen to a close in the process. The problem is that the truce broke down, and when it did, the Houthis announced that they would resume their Red Sea assaults. The US, now under the leadership of Donald Trump, responded almost immediately. From March 15, it's unleashed daily attacks against the Houthis that it claims have taken out several of the group's leaders and key military facilities. These attacks are stronger than anything unleashed under Biden, with the US now seeming to be following a decapitation strategy rather than using the pinpoint strikes it previously attempted under Biden. Over the past 45 days or so, the US has supposedly hit over 1,000 targets in this new wave of strikes. Enter the UK. Now that the UK is bringing Typhoon jet and Paveway IV guided bombs to these constant assaults, the Houthis face the prospect of more intense strikes than ever before. That doesn't mean the rate of strikes will double just because the Houthis now face 2 countries instead of 1. The UK will likely limit its involvement to specific strikes, possibly under the direction of the United States. Still, it's terrible news for a militant group that has already taken a beating from the US. It could also spell terrible news for Yemen civilians. One of the hallmarks of this latest round of strikes is a lack of information being provided by the US, combined with the Houthis controlling the narrative of just how much of an impact the strikes are having in Yemen. Of course, the Houthis never reveal when one of their own is killed by the US, or now the UK. Instead, it keeps its figures vague, while implying that the airstrikes it faces are killing more civilians than they are Houthi combatants. For example, in the same week that the UK announced its joint operation with the US, the Houthis claimed that a US airstrike struck a detention center in Yemen that was housing African migrants. Around 68 people were killed, claimed the Houthis, which builds from the 80 that were supposedly killed when the US struck the port of Ras Isa on April 18. It's not just the Houthis claiming civilian casualties in the latest round of airstrikes. As Anne Schill of the Center for Civilians in Conflict puts it, US strikes continue to raise significant questions about the precautions taken to prevent civilian harm as required both by international law and US policy. The UK is obviously aware of this potential problem. That's likely why the MOD statement made a clear point about how the country used precision bombs launched in the dead of night to reduce the risk of civilian casualties. That won't mean much to the Houthis. With the UK now on board, it faces even more intense strikes than it's dealt with previously, along with the ire of another country that has a far more powerful military than anything the Houthis could put up against it. It's also hard to ignore the target of the UK strike. The MOD says that its Typhoons decimated a building the Houthis were using to manufacture drones. That's massive because the Houthis rely on drones to conduct their Red Sea assaults. In fact, Aklid says that the Houthis' use of drones showcase how the group can innovate in the face of far superior firepower. It points to an example from the summer of 2024, when a drone launched from Yemen managed to fly for 16 hours, covering over 1,600 miles in the process, to arrive in Tel Aviv where it killed a civilian. Houthi drone attacks within Yemen's borders have intensified over the last couple of years, says Aklid. It also points out that the Houthis have been changing the ways they use their drones. In 2021 and 2022, its strikes were limited to Yemen and Saudi Arabia. By the first half of 2024, the majority of the Houthis' drone usage focused on international waters such as the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The point here is that drones are key to everything that the Houthi militant arm does. By taking out a drone manufacturing facility, the UK has severely weakened the group as it tries to respond to the US strikes that are taking out its leaders. Perhaps here we get a hint of how the joint operations between the US and UK will happen going forward. The UK targets specific manufacturing facilities to weaken the Houthis' attacking prowess. From there, the US takes advantage of the lowered threat presented to its aircraft carriers in the Red Sea, such as the USS Harry S. Truman, to launch even more intense strikes against Houthi leadership and other targets. It's a clever 1-2 punch combo that, if it's repeated several times, may just put the Houthis down for the count. As for what the April 29 airstrike means for the UK, opinions are mixed. John Healey points out that the UK working alongside the US to take out the Houthis is intended to be a sign of solidarity between London and Washington. The US continues to be the UK's closest security ally, Healey said when commenting about the strike. They're stepping up in the Red Sea, we're alongside them. That suggests the UK is determined to continue the special relationship it has with the US, even amongst the political turmoil that President Trump's second term has delivered. Who knows, the UK may even be using this cooperation as leverage to convince Trump to lift tariffs against the UK, which include a 10% baseline tariff and 25% tariffs on aluminum, steel and passenger vehicles. The Houthis, on the other hand, have decried British involvement by calling it an example of typical British arrogance. A statement released by the militant group added, "We emphasize that this attack falls with the ongoing Anglo-American efforts to support the Israeli enemy by attempting to halt Yemen's assistance to Palestine so that the Israeli enemy can continue its genocide in Gaza." Some within the UK are also wary about what showing such outright support for the US could mean for the UK at this point. One of those people is Bradford University Professor of Peace Studies Paul Rogers. Writing for The Guardian on May 2nd, Rogers points out that UK involvement in the Houthi crisis could have far-reaching political implications in terms of the UK indirectly aligning itself within an Israeli government that Rogers says has come under much greater criticism for the violence of its conduct the longer the war has lasted. Roger also points out that the political left in the UK broadly supports everyday Palestinians, though not Hamas itself, as reflected by several demonstrations and meetings in UK towns and cities that occur almost weekly. Rogers' point seems to be that the UK getting involved in Yemen now has the potential to create deep divides within the country. He draws a link between the UK support of Israel and its Labour government's declining poll numbers as evidence. As Roger concludes, just now, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's government could be using its limited influence to try and rein in Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Instead, it's increasing its military support for Trump and getting even more embroiled in a deeply controversial conflict. So could that mean bad news for the UK domestically if it continues to send Eurofighters to strike against the Houthis in Yemen? Time will only tell. For now, there's the first official confirmation that the US and the UK are once again working together to tackle the Houthi crisis. Will they be more successful the second time around than they were in 2024? Share your thoughts about the answer to that question in the comments, along with telling us what you think about the UK's April 29 strike. And remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more commentary on the latest developments in the Houthi conflict, Ukraine war, and other military affairs around the globe.